December 3rd, Saint Francis Xavier. One of the first seven. It was 1528. Two brilliant young men in their 22nd year of age, Peter Faber and Francis Xavier, were roommates at the College of St. Barbara in the University of Paris. They had just become graduates and were pursuing their studies for a Master of Arts degree. "Have you met the new student?" Peter asked Francis. "He's a Basque like you from Spain." "You mean Ignatius?" replied Francis. "Isn't he dressed shabbily?" "They say he is 37 years old and has a bad limp." "No, I have not spoken to him." "They have appointed me his tutor in philosophy. May I bring him to one of your lectures?" Peter pleaded. So it came about that Peter brought his protege to Francis Xavier. At first, Francis showed disdain for Ignatius. Francis was aiming at a doctorate in theology at the Sorbonne and then the priesthood and finally a chair in the university with all the pomp and prestige of a professor. But Ignatius quietly whispered to him the words of our Savior, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his soul?" When Peter was absent for a while, Francis took up the instruction of Ignatius. But he found himself soon becoming a disciple of this master of spirituality. He accompanied Ignatius to the hospitals and admired his immense love for the sick. He walked at his side through the dirtiest quarters of the city and found the older man using all his energies to ease the sufferings of the poor and starving. His own dreams of earthly fame and honor paled in insignificance when compared with Ignatius' ambition of conquering the whole world for the greater glory of God. Grace triumphed, and Francis, along with Peter Faber, were among the first seven to take the vows on the feast of the Assumption, 1534, in the company of Jesus, founded by Ignatius. They are known today as Jesuits. Francis was ordained at Venice 3 years later. On board the St. James for India, 5 ships sailed from Lisbon for Goa on April 7, 1541. Aboard the flagship of St. James was a new governor, Don Martin de Souza, and Francis Xavier constituted papal nuncio to the East, together with 2 companions. It was Francis' 35th birthday. He did not secure a servant as was considered proper to a man of his dignity, declaring that he could use his own hands and feet to take care of his wants. Francis would never see Europe again. It took 13 months to reach Goa. Francis mixed freely with the sailors and passengers and soon gained their hearts with his friendly ways. From them, he learned the customs of the place he was going to and picked up the rudiments of the language. Food was scarce and many got sick and died on that journey. Francis, though seasick, himself was always at hand attending to the sick, preaching, catechizing, saying mass, assisting the dying. On May 6, 1542, Francis landed on Indian soil. In the next 10 years, he would set the East ablaze with his love for Christ. New style of apostolate. Francis used to walk through the streets, ringing a bell, inviting children, slaves, the poor, and downtrodden to catechism class. To help the simple and ignorant, he recited the truths of religion in verses that were then sung according to popular tunes everywhere, in the fields and workshops, on the roads, in the homes. In October 1542, he set sail from Goa to preach to the low-cost Paravas in the pearl fishery coast extending from Cape Comorin at the southern tip of India to the island of Mannar off the coast of Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. He was to make this trip of 600 miles 12 more times. First, he learned their language. Then he instructed those who were already baptized and reached out to the others who were eager to embrace the good news. So great was the multitude he had baptized. There were times, he wrote in his letters, when his arms were so tired it was difficult to raise them up. His gentle and courteous manner, his personal charm, and the fact that he lived like the poorest attracted souls. He used to sleep on the ground in a native hut and eat the food of the common people, just rice and water. Up and down the east and west coast of India, Francis traveled, founding churches everywhere and gaining hearts. But that was not enough for this intrepid apostle of Christ. Other countries to be evangelized. In the spring of 1545, Francis took a ship to Malacca, a Malayan seaport where he spent 4 months. From there, he ventured into the unknown world of the Pacific. For 18 months, he visited one island after another. Ambuena, Baranura, Rasalau, Late, Terranate, Demoro. He called these places Moluccas. Despite the tremendous hardships he had to undergo, he wrote to his superior Ignatius, "The dangers to which I am exposed and the tasks I undertake for God are inexhaustible springs of spiritual joy." On his return trip to Goa, Francis stopped at Malacca. There he met a young Japanese, Xavier, whom he instructed and baptized under the name of Paul. From this lad, Francis got first-hand information of Japan, and his heart from then on longed to bring Christ to this nation. On to the land of the rising sun. Francis made a quick round of the mission stations in Ceylon and India, saw to the establishing of the College of St. Paul for the training of Indians to the priesthood, and then made plans to leave for Japan. Father Cosmas de Torres, Brother John Fernandez, and Xavier were to accompany him. The group left Goa for Malacca, where they made a brief stopover. In June 1549, they set sail for Japan in a Chinese boat. The 5,000-kilometer voyage took them 2 months, during which time the 3 Jesuits studied Japanese. They reached Kagoshima on the Feast of the Assumption. Francis, laboring for a full year at Kagoshima, made a few Christians, but these were of the finest metal. They clung to their faith for 10 years after Francis left, until another missionary arrived. And 300 years later, after terrible persecution, a band of Japanese Christians were there to welcome missionaries to their shores. Hirado, Yamaguchi, Miyako, present-day Kyoto, and other Japanese cities were covered in this missionary expedition of Francis. Some places yielding more fruit than the rest. Leaving these communities in the care of Father Torres and Brother Fernandez, Francis took advantage of a Portuguese ship that had arrived in Japan to get a passage back to India. A true soldier of Christ. Francis' next goal was China. A merchant friend of his, James Pereira, was entering China as a Portuguese ambassador and agreed to take Francis in his ship. But James was prevented from proceeding from Malacca to China, and Francis, with just two companions, Christopher, an Indian from Malabar, and Anthony, a Chinese, reached Sanshin in late August 1552. In front of him, a few kilometers distant, lay the Chinese port Canton. Sanshin was a barren island, its inhabitants being a handful of Portuguese traders who used to smuggle in and out of Canton. None of them were ready to take the risk of getting Francis across. With great difficulty, Francis managed to hire a Chinese merchant who demanded a huge sum of money the man promised, but never came. After waiting for 2 months, Francis felt his energies draining. He was struck by a fever and lay in a hut. Through the doorway, he could see China with its millions calling for him. The end drew near, and on December 3rd, 1552, the warrior laid down his arms and went to his master, murmuring, "In you, O Lord, have I hoped. Let me never be confounded." The following February, his body was taken to Malacca, and from there to Goa, where it lies enshrined in a casket in Basilica of Bom Jesus. Francis was canonized in 1622 along with Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits. Sir Walter Scott wrote of the Apostle of the Indies, "One cannot deny him the courage and patience of a martyr, with good sense, resolution, ready wit, and address of the best negotiator that ever went on a temporal embassy." Francis Xavier was beatified in 1619 and canonized by Pope Gregory XV on March 1622. 10 years of missionary labor had taken St. Francis Xavier into over 50 kingdoms, enabling him to win almost 1 million souls for God and lay lasting foundation for the 6 great Asiatic mission fields. Rightly then, he has been named the Apostle of the Indies and patron of the propagation of the faith and of all foreign missions. St. Francis said, "Millions might be easily converted if there were more preachers who would sincerely mind the interests of Jesus Christ and not their own." Happy feast to all.